All right, everyone, welcome back. It's week 2 of the Overwatch League 2023 Pro-Am, and I'm back making watch party content as well as some YouTube videos recapping my thoughts on the day after today's games. I came in this morning after a couple of days away from town, so just got back right in time. Managed to see some of the action. I'm really tired though, so my head is scrambled a little bit all over the place, but I'll try to be a bit concise in all of this and just give you some general thoughts on the first impressions that we got from Group C and Group D, seeing some of these teams now for the first time this year. We got to see Europe take part in this stage of the Pro-Am now with Team Peps and Twisted Minds participating in Group C and D. So it was a good old time. It was a bit one-sided in day 1 of week 2 compared to week 1. So a bit of a difference when it comes to excitement of the games, but still some lessons to learn here. So let's just get straight into it. My first takeaway, or first impression rather, of Group C and D is that, I'm sorry guys, the European Contenders teams, they're not going to make it out of the groups. It was not great. I know that we hyped up Team Peps and Twisted Minds on Plat Chat, and I think we have some pretty grand expectations of both of these teams because they specialize in 2 very different compositions. Let's kick things off with Twisted Minds, who was in our first match of the day against Toronto Defiant. Twisted Minds, they specialize in this Pharah composition, and that's pretty much what they played most of the time when it came to their qualification journey. They do have a few different compositions up their sleeves, but I think we could sort of get the sense, especially with their second map pick, King's Row, where they still remained to play the Pharah when it was their map pick, that it is their first go-to. If they want to play a specific comp, the Pharah composition is their first choice. So it didn't go too well. Now, they might change things up. We got 3 more days to play. They have more games to play in this group. It's not over by any means. They were expected to lose against the Toronto Defiant, although it would have been a nice win for them, considering, you know, their road to making it out. But the Pharah comp just wasn't it. They were exposed pretty heavily by the Toronto Defiant, and they also didn't have the best team sync. So I want to start it off there, really. Even though Twisted Minds, they got beat pretty brutally by the Toronto Defiant in this matchup, I honestly didn't feel like they put their best foot forward compared to some of the games we saw from them in their qualification journey. Now, it is going to get harder. You are going to look worse. You're going to look sillier when you play better competition, right? And Toronto Defiant is probably the best team they've ever played so far. But I still feel like the dives were a little bit unsynchronized when it came to their Pharah composition. LBBD7, he went in a couple times with his barrage on Pharah, and he couldn't get the value that he was really accustomed to. And this was despite the fact that Toronto Defiant, they didn't play a Kiriko for the Suzu or a Diva with Defense Matrix at the time. So I feel like Twisted Minds, they could have performed a little bit better than they did in this matchup. Maybe it was jitters because it was their first match of the Pro-Am. It's also a new setup because I'm assuming that these guys are playing out of London, right? So a few different variables here. Nutella didn't have a great game on the Mercy at all, and I think that was one of the biggest reasons why they fell short in this matchup, because Toronto Defiant, they just punished the Mercy in a way that I don't think that Twisted Minds are accustomed to either. Combine that with HYDRON, have a fantastic game, and we'll get to him later. It really was difficult for Twisted Minds to win this match specifically. That being said though, I think there are a few good pieces on their team. KSA, I think that he is still a great tank player that could potentially get picked up for the Overwatch League as the year goes on, because I think he's versatile and I think he's pretty consistent in most tank roles. So KSA, remember him because he is a great tank player still. Slay also on the Ana. If he hits a few more Bionades, that's going to set up his team for success. And I also want to throw out Quartz as well, who didn't see in the playtime but was on the bench today. Quartz is a really good hitscan player, so maybe with today's performance, maybe Twisted Minds will deviate from their Pharah composition a little bit. And if it's their choice, maybe we'll see Quartz playing some more hitscan for them. Maybe that could be a way for Twisted Minds to get a couple of wins here in some of these games. Moving on, we have Team Peps as well, who got brutally dominated by Washington Justice, to be quite frank. The first map was a little silly, it was a little close, it was a bit of a clown fiesta between the two. We saw that Washington Justice, they did at times prefer to opt into the Reinhardt mirror with Ben Best playing the Reinhardt. And that's where what I thought Team Peps would step up with Crowned up on the Reinhardt instead, that they would be able to outmaneuver Washington Justice. I think that Naga has a fantastic May, for example, and that is a win condition for you in the Reinhardt mirror. They just couldn't get the job done. It was kind of close map 1, but then on King's Row, it was just lights out for the Team Peps, and it didn't look good for them at all. They were a bit all over the place. And I guess I'm a little bit disappointed because I thought that maybe one tricking this Reinhardt composition, they'd be able to specialize on it, throw their opponents off guard, but they just weren't able to keep the pace, and the teamwork was a little bit off, and they weren't able to punish their opponents as much as I thought it would. Now, Crundup did post a video, and he had some thoughts, let's just put it that way, about the setup that they were dealing with in London. And, you know, it was not what they were accustomed to back home. So maybe, again, maybe some jitters because it was their first match in a Pro-Am, or maybe just some uncomfortability with the setup itself. That's just kind of what you have to deal with, though, unfortunately. It's never going to be perfect. I played at LAN myself many times, and rarely it is perfect. For example, during the World Cup 2019 qualification matches in Thailand, my mouse died, and I had to go to the Razer store and buy a Razer mouse that had built-in mouse acceleration. It's just one of those things. Stuff happen on LAN, you're not prepared for it. It's a little bit, you know, out of the ordinary. Hadi, for example, remember when he posted that they were screaming from, like, I don't know, the restrooms, or like the, I don't know, like the, I don't know what you call it, where you change clothes and stuff, like in an arena. That's just going to be what, you know, changes for some of these tournaments. Now, maybe you had pretty high expectations because Blizzard came in clutch and were like, hey, we'll offer you a place to stay in London, but it's unfortunate. Did I think it would have made a huge difference if they played from their homes in their office? Maybe, but probably not, to be quite honest with you. Washington Justice, they look like the best team. And Washington Justice actually look like they might be able to make it out of this group, even though it is pretty stiff competition and there are a couple of other teams vying for those qualification spots. So that being said, I think the holistic point here is that Twisted Minds and Team Peps, despite the fact they came in with a lot of hype for this tournament, what we saw from them in day one, I don't think it's going to be enough for them to make it out of the group this weekend overall. So a bit disappointing in that regard, but there are a couple of nice players on both teams, so look out for individual performances. That's what I like to say. My number 2 first impression is the first time we got to see Houston Outlaws. And we actually saw Houston Outlaws play twice in day one here, where they first played the Toronto Defiant, and then they have wrapped up the day playing against the New York Excelsior as well. Against the Toronto Defiant, it was probably the match of the group stage qualification so far. If you want to talk sheer hype, then yeah, sure. Maybe Trick Room upsetting Shock is more for you or your liking, or the match we had between the London Spitfire and the Saints, of course. But talking just about peak competitive gameplay, Houston Outlaws versus Toronto Defiant was an absolute banger. It was back and forth, lots of different compositions, individual plays from star players around the league as well. It was a lot of fun to watch. And the two players that stood out the most to me, it was Shu and Violet, the backline of the Houston Outlaws. Now, most of the time, you are going to shine the spotlight on the damage players on these teams because they just rack up the highlights and they look fantastic. Sometimes the tank players, of course, if you have a Reinhardt hitting a big shatter or a Winston cleaning house, if you're like Fearless, for example. But Violet and Shu, they were just built different in this match against the Toronto Defiant. Overall, Violet, every map, hit consistently found picks on the Zenyatta when he wasn't supposed to. It would be like going into fights, Violet would just found random kills onto the Toronto Defiant. It would be fantastic moments mid-fight and cleaning up, being really good in the clutch for Violet. His Zenyatta was just like top tier, exactly what you want to see. But Shu had like the player of the match performance, especially on our last push map as well, where it was one of the best Ana games that I've honestly seen in a very long time. Every fight, perfect sleep darts, bio-nades. Some fights, he'd straight up just carry the fight by hitting like a three-man biotic grenade and then sleep the enemy Winston, and that would be the fight. That would just be Shu on the Ana, putting in just an absolute hero performance and carrying his team to victory. And seeing that fight after fight after fight, there was even one instance, I think he walked into Kalush's Winston bubble and slept on Winston because he was just confident that he'd hit the sleep dart and then that his team wouldn't touch the Winston itself and wake up Kalush with that Nano. Now, the thing that people will question is, do they have good enough of a main support player when it comes to Lucio, Mercy? Well, we'll have to see. Violet Lucio, it's been okay. It's been decent enough in the past where you can actually make it far in tournaments with it, but it hasn't been the best Lucio in the league. I think just the play potential from both of these players though, Shu and Violet, if they figure out the swaps when it comes to Zenyatta, Ana, Kiriko is really strong right now as well, Kiriko, Ana. they're going to have carry games, just like they had in today's matchup against the Toronto Defiant. And I'd be on the lookout for more of those. Honestly, a nasty duo. Now, final point as well, before we wrap up today's video, is that HYDRON is just crazy. HYDRON was really good in both of Toronto Defiant's matches today. Starting off, he's playing against a Farah team in Twisted Minds, and he came out on Cassidy and had a really good performance from Cassidy. They were putting nanos and resources into his Cassidy, and he consistently racked up kills to really carry his team in some of these fights, and that's exactly what you want to see. When you're playing against a Farah team, your hitscan player is probably going to be the most important player. Now, your hitscan player is going to need help from your tanks, from your supports, to keep him alive, to protect them with bubbles, to make space, all of that stuff. But if your hitscan player can pop off against a Farah team, that is going to make a massive difference. And I think that HYDRON overall, he was a standout player for me today. So that's kind of what we expect from him when it comes to the Cassidy. But then also against a top tier opponent like the Houston Outlaws, we saw several times where HYDRON on Hanzo, for example, on Nepal, which was our first map between the two teams, that HYDRON would just have an amazing Hanzo performance as well. So this is really promising for me to see as well when it comes to HYDRON's gameplay, because most of his highlights were actually on the Sojourn at the late stages of last season. When it came to Florida Mayhem qualifying for the playoffs in the later half of the season, HYDRON stepped up to the plate, and that's when we really started to emphasize on HYDRON and how important he was to the Florida Mayhem. And then when the playoffs started, HYDRON was the go-to man for the Florida Mayhem, because we were in a pretty important meta when it came to your Sojourn player. So HYDRON, a fantastic player when it comes to the Sojourn, but now also showing on Cassidy and on Hanzo, he can be a star player for the Toronto Defiant that they can lean on reliably throughout the rest of this season. Now, there were a couple of swaps throughout this series, a couple of subs. Toronto Defiant, they have a few damage players that they can swap around, whether it's Sam, HYDRON, or Speedily, of course, and Speedily plays some of the Tracer today. So I'm expecting to see some switches from the Toronto Defiants when it comes to their subs, just to figure out who is going to play what players are we going to play on what map, and what kind of rotation are we going to have when it comes to our team. But I would be surprised to not see HYDRON play a large majority of Toronto Defiance matches, especially when we get into the regular season, because he was so impressive today, where I think that he arguably might be the most important player for this Toronto Defiant team when it comes to having success against opponent top tier teams. When you're going head to head against teams like Houston Outlaws, you need a star player that can have big impact moments to clutch up for you. And I think that HYDRON had that in many times today in their matchup against the Houston Outlaws. So be on the lookout for HYDRON. I think that he was fantastic today. We did see the LA Gladiators. They beat Wisp 2-0, but I might save the LA Gladiators for tomorrow's video, where they'll be playing Team Peps tomorrow on Friday, and as well as the Boston Uprising, a Boston team we haven't seen yet. So I might talk about the LA Gladiators then. They started off a bit shaky on map 1, but then map 2 was just an absolute sweep. So not too much to take away from the Gladiators just yet. But my first impressions of Group C and D, there you go, 3 talking points for you. Hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and stay tuned for tomorrow's watch party, where I will be covering all of the Pro-Am games once more. Like the video, it helps with the algorithm, and it makes sure I get more views, which I really want. So thank you so much for your service. I hope you enjoyed today's matches as well as today's video, and I'll see you tomorrow for more Overwatch League action.